Hello, sleepy dreamer. How you doing? Tonight I'll be your guide, here to ease you into calm, restful sleep. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future scary bedtime stories. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Also, let me know if there's a story you'd love to hear next. I once thought overnight shifts meant fewer problems, less noise, and little more than me with my thoughts. But problems find their way in when no one's looking, especially in places most folks prefer forgotten. My name is Daniel Creer. At the time, I was 26, still raw from a breakup that had wrecked me in ways I hadn't believed possible. I had just relocated to Cedar Hollow, a quiet town in northern Wisconsin that most travelers only passed through. I went because some relatives lived 2 counties away, but I didn't want family close enough for constant check-ins. I needed distance. After weeks of either oversleeping or not resting at all, I knew I had to keep busy. Something simple, numbing, a job that covered rent and gave me the sense of a schedule again. That's how I landed the overnight desk job at the Pinerest Motor Inn. It wasn't even on the internet. I spotted a flyer pinned to a laundromat corkboard, the paper browned and curling. Night clerk needed. Cash pay. Quiet work. Apply in person. It belonged to a wiry man named Walter Hames, maybe late 60s, moving like someone worn down by years. He didn't ask about my background and I didn't press for details. I showed up, and he handed me a jangling keyring along with the shift. "You're a quiet one," he said, smirking like it was some private joke. "That's good. This place doesn't need more noise." And that was that. I began the next evening, midnight to 8 a.m., every night of the week. I figured I'd last a month, maybe 2. I lasted 12 days. Pinerest sat at the edge of town just past Route 7, where the lamps ended and the woods spread wide. The building stretched in an L shape with 12 rooms facing the lot. Most nights only 4 or 5 were taken, usually by truck drivers, contractors, or nameless drifters who vanished before sunrise. The office was no bigger than a storage closet with a scarred counter, a squeaky fan, and a faded sign nailed behind the desk. Absolutely no refunds. There was a thin cot in the back, where Walter said I could nap if things were dead. They usually were. Hours passed with nothing but moths tapping the glass, the TV murmuring silently, or me flipping through old magazines. I kept the front light burning and the door locked, not out of fear, but because it felt right. By the 4th night, I started recognizing the usuals. A trucker named Vince always asked for room 3 and left a 20 on the counter. A woman in her 40s named Carla checked in every Friday and stayed until Sunday. Her face always looked swollen, like she'd cried most of the drive. And then there was room 8. Walter told me never to rent it. Plumbing's busted, he claimed. Flood's bad. But the strange part was, the key to room 8 wasn't even on my ring. The first night that went sideways was August 11th. I recall because a storm was rolling in, and the air hung heavy, the sky undecided about breaking. Only 2 rooms were filled, Vince in 3, and a couple in 5. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard knocking. Not on the office door, on room 8. I pushed up from the chair and leaned toward the window. The lot was nearly empty. Rain began to tap the glass sharp and fast. Then another knock, louder, 4 steady beats. I stepped into the rain, shirt soaked almost instantly, and walked toward room 8. No one stood at the door. I turned to scan the lot, still empty, but I swore the curtain moved in that window. Back at the office, the TV was off, though I hadn't touched it, and on the counter sat a silver key with 8 etched across the top. I didn't mention it to Walter. I wanted to, but something in me resisted. I slipped it in my jacket pocket, carrying it for 3 nights. Then on August 14th, around 3:15 a.m., headlights swept the lot. A beat-up white Buick with mud-caked tires and 1 headlight gone. Out stepped a tall, thin man in a dark coat with the hood up, though it was 70 degrees. He didn't come near me. He walked straight to room 8 and unlocked the door. By the time I made it outside, the door had shut. I stood there too long, debating a knock. I didn't. I circled the rooms instead, looking for signs anyone else had noticed. Vince's blinds were sealed shut. The couple in 5 were gone. I hadn't seen them leave. I went back to the office and stayed upright until daylight came. August 15th was my last night there. Walter came in early, pushing open the front door just as I was leaving. "You look like hell," he muttered. "Didn't sleep?" "No," I said flat. His eyes locked on the key in my palm. "Where'd you find that?" His tone was sharp. I tried to play it casual. "Desk drawer." His stare tightened. "You didn't go in there, did you?" "In where?" "Room 8. No, I lied. Walter studied me for too long before saying something I still remember. If you ever see someone going in or out of 8, call me right away, no matter the time. Why? I asked. He only shook his head and walked away. That night I carried a thermos of coffee and a flashlight. My gut screamed something was coming. At 2:58 a.m. the Buick returned. Same headlight missing, same man. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another figure climbed out of the back seat, younger, mid-20s, hoodie pulled up, face marked with bruises. They went to room 8. The tall man unlocked it. The younger one wavered, resisting, until the older man grabbed his neck and shoved him inside. The door slammed. I stayed frozen. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then I heard muffled screaming, frantic and desperate, like someone trying to stay quiet but failing. I called Walter. No answer. I called again. Nothing. So I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out. Rain had returned, light but enough to slick the pavement. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then a thud. Another. Then nothing. My hand twisted the knob. It opened. The room was black, stinking of damp smoke and something metallic. I raised the flashlight with shaking hands. The bed was undone, sheets stained with something dark. In the corner slumped the younger man, eyes wide, mouth frozen, breath gone. Before I could move, footsteps came from behind. I turned. The tall man stood in the doorway, blocking my exit. He only stared, then grinned. I threw myself at him with all I had, knocking him into the wall. I bolted, sprinted across the lot, dove into my car, and tore out, gravel spraying. I didn't stop until the next town. I parked in a gas station lot until daylight, then called police and told them everything. They found the body, along with another buried behind the inn. Turns out Walter had history. Years earlier he'd been investigated for shady rentals and trafficking, but slipped free for lack of proof. This time there was enough. He was arrested 2 days later, as was the man from room 8. Neither spoke during the trial. The Pinerest Motor Inn was condemned and eventually demolished. Still, sometimes I dream of the screams, of that cold key in my hand. I don't work nights anymore, and I never drive back roads again. I hadn't planned on driving so late. The night before, I had stayed alone at a secluded farmhouse in rural Wales, in the quiet stretch near Powys. The place belonged to the family of an old college mate who suggested it as a peaceful hideaway after I lost my position in Cardiff. I had worked as a junior architect, spending endless nights on projects for a firm that eventually folded due to mismanagement. When the layoff struck, it unraveled everything. My sense of purpose, my habits, even my relationship. So when Marcus offered me his family's farmhouse, I accepted without hesitation. The farmhouse sat in the middle of rolling hills, swathes of open moorland, and endless sheep-dotted fields with no one nearby. No cars, no traffic, no sound but the shifting wind. It was the stillness I thought I needed, yet I barely slept there. That night, the old building groaned and shifted. Pipes rattled despite no taps running, and around 3 a.m., I swore I heard deliberate footsteps overhead, though the second floor had been sealed for decades. I blamed it on nerves, on the unease of being alone, but it clung to me. So the next evening I packed my things early and left. My plan was to head south, stop somewhere on the way and finish the trip in the morning. Another restless night wasn't worth it. The fading sun stretched golden rays across the hills as I drove. My battered Vauxhall Astra hummed softly down the country lanes, a sound that almost calmed me. Villages passed by with thatched roofs and shuttered pubs, their windows lifeless. The scenery turned haunting once the sun dipped below the horizon, mile after mile of hedgerows and fields swallowed in mist. By 10:30 I was still an hour from the nearest town. The roads grew narrower, lined with sharp turns and wild overgrowth. My phone was dead for signal. My eyes kept drooping. That's when I noticed it, a dim glow ahead, faint through the fog. Drawing closer, it sharpened into a battered sign propped beside an old stone wall, lit by a flickering bulb. Ravenshallow Inn. Vacancies. There was nothing else for miles. I pulled in. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I rolled into the empty car park. The structure stretched long and low, a single story of stonework that looked Victorian, maybe even older. Ivy gripped the walls, and wooden window frames rotted around glass panes. The shutters were stripped of paint, and part of the foundation seemed to sag where the earth had shifted beneath it. No cars, no sound, only the buzzing vacancy sign. I lingered in the car, debating whether to keep going. But my vision blurred. My body begged for rest. One night I told myself, I climbed out into the damp August air, colder than it should have been. A faint smell of smoke drifted by, though no chimney released it. The reception was a small annex. Its wooden door moaned as I pushed it open. Inside, a single bulb flickered yellow light across the cramped lobby. It reeked of mildew and damp timber, heavy in my nose. Behind the counter sat an elderly man, perhaps in his 70s. Thin, pale. His watery eyes seemed fixed through me, not at me. "Evening," I said carefully. He gave a slow nod. "One night?" "Yes, just one, passing through." He didn't ask for documents, didn't ask for payment first, just slid a brass key across the counter, dull and tarnished. "Room 4, far end." I paused. "Anyone else staying here?" He said nothing. I picked up the key and turned away. The corridor was narrow, darker than it should have been, though bulbs lined the ceiling. The wallpaper, once patterned with golden vines, had dulled to lifeless brown. I passed rooms 1, 2, and 3, all shut, all silent. Room 4 was the last door on the left. The door resisted before groaning open. The room smelled not filthy but stale, like forgotten dust and sealed windows. A narrow bed with a faded floral quilt sat against the wall. A warped dresser with a cloudy mirror stood opposite, and a single lamp flickered weakly when I lit it. The wallpaper peeled in one corner. The floor sagged faintly under the carpet. Still, it was quiet. I placed my bag down, sat on the bed, and tried to ease the sense that clung to me. Perhaps it was leftover nerves from the farmhouse. I told myself one solid sleep would clear it all away, but I couldn't settle. Something about the space pressed against me, wrong in a way words couldn't hold. I checked the wardrobe, empty. Looked beneath the bed, only dust. Yet the feeling stayed, heavy and watching. I left the lamp on and lay down fully dressed, deciding to rest only until dawn. Around 1 in the morning, I heard it, the faint slide of fabric against the floor. My body went rigid. The room was dim but visible in the weak lamp glow. My gaze fixed to the corner at the foot of the bed. Something crouched there. At first it seemed like a shadow, but it was too solid, too heavy. The shape of someone hunched toward the wall. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I begged myself to believe it was a trick of light. But then it shifted. The figure didn't stand or crawl. Its torso rotated slowly, like a puppet tugged without strings. And where its face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth. Just smooth, blank flesh, like wet clay. My body locked, terror freezing me in place. The lamp flickered again. The figure drifted forward, hovering inches from the floor, steady and silent. Panic jolted me awake. I grabbed my bag, lunged for the door, and tore it open. I never once looked back. I sprinted through the corridor, past the dead lobby, and flung myself into my car. The inn stood silent behind me as I fumbled with the ignition. The engine stuttered, then caught. Gravel sprayed as I fled the grounds and sped into the night. I didn't slow for nearly 2 hours until I reached a 24-hour station outside Gloucester. Parking beneath the harsh floodlights, I sat shaking, gasping, replaying every second. I could lie to myself, blame fatigue, tricks of shadow, my mind unraveling, but the truth was louder. I hadn't imagined that form. I hadn't imagined its faceless head or its impossible movements. What I'll never forget is the suffocating weight of that room, the way silence felt like it was burying me alive. I've never been able to stay in a roadside motel since, not because I fear it will return, but because I dread the opposite, that it won't, and that somewhere, in another dark room, it still waits. When I was 17, a routine school excursion shifted the way I saw everything. At the time, I was still piecing together who I was, living in a small English town named Brindleford. It wasn't the quaint, picturesque sort you'd find on postcards, but rather the kind of place where life crawled on uneventfully until it didn't. I was in year 11 at Redwell Secondary, a school known more for its peeling paint and weary substitute teachers than for any sense of prestige. The buzz started when permission slips went out for our GCSE history trip abroad. The schedule listed Belgium, World War battlefields, memorials, and museums. Our history teacher, Mr. Havner, a wiry, quick-speaking man in his 40s, looked like he was the most eager of all. He kept insisting it was a chance to step directly into history's pages. To be honest, I couldn't care less about that. All I wanted was to get out of town, even if only for 5 days. There were 18 of us, plus Mr. Havner and Miss Caro, our English teacher, recruited as the second chaperone. Hardly anyone slept the night before we left. By the time we made it to Belgium, Drained from the ferry crossing and desperate to crash somewhere, none of us cared where we stayed. That's when things went sideways. The coach turned off the motorway, winding down a rural road that led to a place called Dremswick, a little farming village that wasn't on the itinerary. At first I didn't think much of it. Then we stopped at a gravel driveway before a 2-story building smothered in ivy and green mold. The sign above the entrance read, "House Draven Grey Inn," though half the letters had already fallen away. "This is it," someone muttered behind me. "Temporary stop," said Mr. Havner, clapping his hands. The original hotel had a plumbing problem. This was the only local alternative. My friend Nira tugged her hoodie tighter and whispered, "Looks like something from a horror flick." We shuffled off the bus, caught between fatigue and unease. The air was colder than expected. Gravel crunched as we dragged our bags over the cracked steps. The front door creaked open before anyone even touched it. That should have warned us. Inside, the air smelled of damp ash and paper. The lobby looked frozen in time. Faded carpet, sagging ceilings, mismatched antique furniture. A brass chandelier swung lazily, though no draft stirred it. From behind the desk emerged a man with sallow skin and deep-set eyes that barely blinked. "Bienvenue," he said, his French accent deliberate and heavy. "You are the students. I am Marcel. Please do not use the cellar. It is under repairs." "Sure," said Mr. Havner awkwardly. "We won't wander." Marcel handed us iron keys with oversized tags before turning silently away. We were divided into pairs or trios across 2 upper floors. My assigned room was number 27, at the top floor, shared with Nira and Tom. The hall leading up flickered dimly, the bulbs sputtering like gas lamps. I remember thinking it resembled the kind of place guests checked into but never returned from. The room was cramped, crooked beds, peeling floral wallpaper, thick dust over the windowsills. Outside stretched a lifeless, empty field. "This place gives asthma just by looking," Tom said, collapsing onto the bed, his laugh oddly hollow. Nira didn't reply. She stood fixated on the wardrobe mirror. I followed her gaze, and for an instant I swore I saw movement behind us in the reflection, a blurred figure. But when I turned, nothing was there. "Did you?" I started. "No," she cut me off quickly. "Don't." That evening, after a bland meal of boiled potatoes and rubbery meat in the inn's dining hall, most of us crowded into one room to stream a film on someone's hotspot. Mr. Havner checked in before going downstairs to speak with Marcel about the next day. Miss Caro had already excused herself, complaining of a headache. We were halfway through the movie when it began. The lights flickered. Then came the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor above us, except we were on the top floor. "Pipes," someone whispered, though their voice trembled. Then the knocking started, steady and deliberate from inside the wardrobe. I froze the movie. The sound stopped. "You're joking," Nira whispered. "Someone's messing with us." Tom yanked the wardrobe open. Empty. Nervous laughter broke out, but none of us slept easily that night. I woke again and again to whispers, low, rasping like voices inside the walls. At one point, I thought I saw a crouched figure in the far corner, but when I lifted my phone's flashlight, it was gone. By morning, Leah, one of the girls, was missing. Her bed untouched, her bag by the door. The teachers assumed she'd wandered off and lost her way. Marcel swore he hadn't seen her. We searched the fields, nearby lanes, even behind the inn. Nothing. The police were called, but they seemed indifferent. "She likely ran away," one officer shrugged. "We knew Leah. She wouldn't vanish without her phone or shoes, especially not here, in the middle of the night." That night, the whispers came again, clearer, louder. They repeated one word over and over. "Below." All of us heard it. At 2:11 a.m., the fire alarm blared. We rushed outside in the freezing air, but no smoke or flames appeared. The alarm cut off abruptly. Marcel never emerged. Neither did Miss Caro. Mr. Havner tried to steady us, though his pale face kept turning toward the building. That's when we realized Nira was gone. I found her in the cellar. The door hung slightly open. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness as I crept down. She stood at the bottom, stiff, fists clenched, eyes wide. "Nira," I whispered. She turned slowly, pupils blown wide, mouth stretched open as if she had been screaming. Behind her, something stirred in the shadows. I didn't wait. I grabbed her arm and dragged her upstairs. She didn't resist. When we emerged, Mr. Havner's face was ashen. "We're leaving, now." We packed in silence, no one objecting. At dawn, we left House Draven Grey. The sun spread a pale gold over the fields, but the inn remained dark. Nobody came to see us off. Leah was never found. The police claimed there was no record she'd ever stayed there, no evidence she'd even traveled with us. Her parents accused us of lying. Nira never spoke about the cellar. Weeks later, she transferred schools. As for me, that place still haunts my sleep. The whispers, the biting cold, and sometimes I glimpse Leah on buses and mirrors at crowded stops. She never looks older. I don't know what dwelled in that inn, but I know it watched us, chose us, and I know we were never meant to escape. I didn't end up in Brookhaven by choice. It was the sort of town you sped past, not somewhere you stayed. The gas station had a single pump and shut down before dark. But when I got laid off from the heating and cooling company where I'd spent nearly 7 years, I didn't have many options. My city lease was far too pricey to keep, and this place was the only location where my modest savings could carry me beyond a few weeks. I had a distant cousin named Eric who lived nearby. We weren't particularly close, but when I called to ask if he knew of any cheap places to rent, he told me about a basement flat beneath an old insurance office. Technically not legal housing, no proper exit, limited heat, but it was $380 a month with a mattress and a mini fridge included. I signed on. The first few weeks felt like I was drifting. No direction, no connections, no drive. I filled out dozens of online applications, hardly any replied. One afternoon I wandered into the Pine Hollow Inn just off Route 45. It sat at the edge of town between a decaying diner and a mechanic's yard that hadn't seen a vehicle in ages. Its neon sign flickered in broken intervals, half the bulbs burned out. A handwritten notice taped to the door read, "Night clerk needed." The owner, a wiry man in his 50s named Carl Jensen, hired me immediately. Likely just relieved someone had answered the ad. The inn had 15 rooms, single story, laid out like a strip mall. The front office was a glass-walled booth attached to a small lounge with a coffee pot and a half-dead soda machine. Carl gave me 2 days shadowing a grizzled smoker named Larry, who mumbled more than he talked before tossing me the desk keys with little more than a shrug. "Nothing happens here. Just keep awake, track the books, and don't let guests wreck the place," Carl said. Not many locals, just road traffic. And with that, my first solo shift began. It was mid-March. Windy, cold, and the lot was half filled by 10 that night. Most were traveling drivers who spoke barely a sentence before locking themselves away. I recall one woman clearly. She came in close to 10:45, early 40s, exhausted, wrapped in a dark green parka as if it were armor. Her eyes were swollen, and she kept darting glances toward the highway like someone might follow her in. "Need a room?" I asked. "Yes, please," she replied quickly, fumbling in her bag without looking at me. "Just one night? Cash. Tonight." I nodded and handed her the key to room 12. She walked fast down the row, pausing before unlocking her door, glancing back again, then slipping inside and drawing the curtain tight. I didn't dwell on it. Travelers get jumpy. It's normal. The quiet afterward pressed too heavily, the kind where even the vending machine's buzz seems louder than it should. Around 1:20 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I hadn't heard any car. A man stood there, late 30s, plain jeans, flannel shirt, hair unkempt. His eyes were glazed and he kept looking past me. "Looking for a room?" I asked. "You got vacancies?" His voice was flat. "Yeah, $50. Want one?" He didn't answer immediately, just kept glancing behind me, obvious, uneasy. Finally he muttered, "No, forget it," and left. The bell rang again. I waited to see a car pull away. Nothing. I opened the office door, the cold wind bit at me. Silent lot, no one there. I stepped outside, peered around the corner. Empty. I went back inside, convincing myself he must have been walking, or high, or maybe I was reading too much into it. About half an hour later, the desk phone rang. I jumped. No one had called all night. "Front desk," I answered. A shaken female voice whispered, "There's a man outside my room. Please, he won't leave." My pulse spiked. "Which room?" 12. Grabbing the flashlight, I hurried down the walkway. From halfway, I could already tell the figure was gone. The curtain of room 12 was slightly parted, a pale face peeking out. The door opened a crack. The woman from earlier stood there, tense, clutching her phone. "Did you see him?" she asked. "No, he's gone." "Did he say anything?" She shook her head, just stared. "I told him to leave, he wouldn't." "Do you know him?" I asked. "No," she replied too quickly. I asked for details. She described the same man in flannel. "Do you want me to call the police?" I offered. "No, it's fine, I'll leave early. Just if you see him, tell him to go." She closed the door before I could finish saying more. I couldn't let it go. Why deny knowing him? She was clearly terrified. And the man, He hadn't driven up, hadn't checked in. Where had he come from? I paced the office, rechecked the locks, replayed every detail. That's when I noticed the key rack looked wrong. Each room had an old plastic tag etched with the number. Room 12's key was gone, as expected, and the others in use were gone too. But room 6, still listed as vacant, was missing as well. My stomach knotted. I double-checked the logbook, no record of a check-in, but the key was gone. I called Carl. 4 rings, voicemail. I muttered curses, considering calling the sheriff myself. Then crash. Another. Then a muffled scream. From room 12. I grabbed the wooden bat Carl kept behind the desk. Mostly decorative, but better than nothing, and sprinted outside. Room 12's door was flung open. Inside, the woman was pressed into a corner, trembling, while between her and the exit stood the man. His voice was low, words unclear. I shouted without thinking. His head snapped toward me, face twisted with fury, eyes red. He lunged. I swung the bat wildly, bracing, but he didn't hit me. Instead, he tore past, sprinting full speed across the lot, through the ditch and into the woods across the road. I stood there stunned before rushing back to the woman. She was crying, her lips split, but alive. "I'm calling the cops," I told her. She didn't object. Deputies arrived within 10 minutes. We both gave statements. At last, she admitted the truth. The man's name was Daniel, her ex-husband. She had filed a restraining order months back, after a violent incident in Ohio. He'd broken it before, tracking her down multiple times. That night, she had been heading to her sister's place several states away, stopping only to rest. She hadn't thought he'd pursue her this far. She didn't want police involvement unless it was unavoidable. He must have been watching from the trees, waiting for me to step away, then stole the spare key. They searched the woods, issued alerts, filed a report, but he vanished without trace. I stayed at that inn 4 more months. I can't say why I didn't quit. Maybe I wanted to prove something. Maybe I had no better option. But after that night, everything felt different. Every noise made me flinch. Every guest who avoided eye contact put me on edge. I checked the keys 10 times each shift. Eventually, I landed a tech job back in the city. Packed up and left Brookhaven for good. Carl still mails me a Christmas card every year. Always signs it, "Hope it's quieter where you are." But I often think back to that night, about how close things came, how 5 more minutes could have changed it all, or what would have happened if he hadn't fled. And the truth is, I still don't know why he ran. Maybe some small part of him knew a line was crossed. Or maybe he just loved the chase. I once worked overnight shifts at a small roadside lodge just outside of Fairview, Virginia. It was the type of spot you'd miss if you weren't paying attention, squeezed between an abandoned cafe and a fading service station, resting just off a poorly lit highway mostly used by long-haul drivers or lost travelers who had taken the wrong exit. My name is Mai Nguyen, though around town most called me May. I had arrived in America from Vietnam in 1991 after spending a grueling year in a refugee camp in Malaysia. I was only 21 when I landed in Richmond, barely able to form a sentence in English, carrying nothing but a folded paper with my uncle's address and a borrowed jacket too thin for winter. By the time I was 25, I had managed to rent a studio above a laundromat and lived on my own. I sent money back home each month, so I accepted any job offered to me. The lodge position paid little, but it was consistent. After what I had been through, I learned not to complain. The place was 2 stories tall, with 26 rooms and a broken neon sign buzzing Maple Grove Inn. The front desk was managed by Frank, a broad man in his 50s who chain-smoked menthols and didn't pay much attention to guests. He liked me though, said I was quiet and dependable. He'd leave a stack of assignments in my slot, and I'd clean from noon until evening unless someone delayed checkout, which didn't happen often. But during one week in late October 1997, something unsettling began. A man checked into room 207, the only unit facing the forest behind the property. He arrived just as the sun dipped low, driving a black Lincoln Town car. I remember because the glare from his headlights startled me as I finished tidying up room 205. When I peeked through the curtain, I noticed him standing still beside the car, staring up at the lodge. He wore a long ash-gray coat, gloves despite the warm weather, and a black hat that seemed out of place. He moved at a measured pace, like someone with no need to hurry. When he reached the counter, I heard Frank mutter under his breath. "Name?" he asked flatly. "Madison," the man replied, his voice calm but deliberate, almost like it was rehearsed as he slid over a credit card. Frank glanced at it, squinted, shrugged, and ran it through. No identification was asked for. This was the late 90s, no cameras, no strict checks, nothing. One night, Frank questioned. Perhaps longer. I'll let you know, the man said. He carried nothing, no suitcase, no bag, not even a briefcase. He simply walked upstairs and disappeared into room 207. The following morning, around 11 a.m., I tapped gently on the door for routine cleaning. No response. I knocked again. Still nothing. I assumed he had gone out, but the do not disturb sign hung on the knob, and rules meant I couldn't enter. By the third day it was the same. No request for service, no word from him, yet I knew someone was inside. A dim yellow glow seeped from beneath the door all night long. Once, when I passed by, I caught faint sounds, like a low radio just beyond hearing, though not loud enough to make out words. I asked Frank if he had spoken with Mr. Madison. Guy comes down once every night, asks for coffee. That's all, Frank said, dropping ashes into a paper tray. Strange but harmless. Harmless wasn't how I'd describe it. Every time I neared 207, my skin prickled, and the air felt unnaturally cold. Eventually, I began skipping the room on my rounds. Then came day 32. The do not disturb sign had vanished. In my slot, Frank had left a note. 207 checked out overnight. Key left on counter, cleaned thoroughly. I lingered outside the door for a long time, staring, before I finally reached for the handle. Inside, the curtains were drawn tight, making the room unnervingly dark. The stench hit instantly, sharp and metallic like spoiled meat. I froze. The place was wrecked. The sheets stripped, a towel stained and tossed on the floor, the chair knocked over, dresser drawers pulled open and scattered. What struck me most was the cold. It felt like stepping into a freezer. My breath clouded in the air, though the AC was off. I crept toward the bathroom, clutching the air freshener as if it might shield me. The door groaned open, revealing everything spotless except the mirror. Across the glass, brownish streaks smeared in frantic swipes, forming a message in uneven letters. I am not the only one. My pulse quickened. The toilet lid stood open, and inside floated a single black glove, bloated and soaked. No blood, no body, just that glove and that phrase. I shouted for Frank. He stormed upstairs, cursing. But when he entered, his voice faltered. "Call the police," he whispered. The police arrived. So did the lodge owner. Maple Grove Inn was instantly declared a crime scene. The credit card Madison had used was stolen. The name didn't exist in any system. No ID, no license plate record. The Lincoln was gone, vanished entirely. The most horrifying part came 2 weeks later when a woman's body was discovered in a shallow grave just half a mile into the woods behind the inn. She had been missing for over a month, a waitress from Delaware. Her hair had been cut away completely, her wrists bound with black tape. The glove, the same brand, was found at the site. Authorities never confirmed if Madison was responsible. No prints, no sightings, nothing. It was as if he had erased himself completely. I quit the following morning. Told Frank I was finished. He didn't argue. He left a month later, and the inn closed down for renovations that never actually took place. I left Virginia, moved in with my cousin in North Carolina, and tried to bury the memory. But some nights, when the wind cuts through the trees, I swear I hear the door of that lodge creak open again. I feel the icy air that clung to room 207. I smell the metallic rot, and in dreams, I see that mirror once more. The words carved in panic. I am not the only one. A warning, or maybe a confession. Whatever it meant, I carry it still. I walked away, but part of me never left that room, caught there like a shadow with no name. I hadn't been sleeping much in the weeks before that trip. My thoughts were cluttered with too many things I couldn't shake. My name is Jordan Hall, and at that time I was 29 years old, stuck in a monotonous job as a freelance field technician for small communication systems. Whenever a rural tower or relay went down in some forgotten corner, people like me were dispatched to repair it. That particular week, I was assigned to a coastal town called Brinehaven, a 4.5-hour drive south of my place in eastern Pennsylvania. I didn't want to set out at dawn and get caught in traffic, so after finishing a long Monday shift, I packed a quick bag and left around 6:30 in the evening. My plan was simple: drive late, crash somewhere cheap, and arrive at the site first thing in the morning. I'd made these kinds of trips plenty of times. You learn to expect odd roadside motels, strange towns, empty stretches of road. Eventually you stop believing online reviews and start relying on instinct. That's what makes this so difficult to explain, because that night my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I dismissed it. I found the place on a local rental site I occasionally used. A man named Mark Rar listed a small private guest house inside a gated neighborhood, just outside a little Delaware town called Darrell Ridge, not far from Route 9. $50, private lockbox. The photos showed something a bit outdated but tidy and comfortable. I messaged him to confirm it was available. He replied within 10 minutes, but the conversation felt strange. His writing was vague, fragmented, missing punctuation. When I asked who would leave the key, he answered that his father dropped it earlier. I pressed for details, and he wrote, "Yeah, just the door box under number you get in fine." That alone should have made me turn around, but fatigue won. It was around 11:15 p.m. when I exited the silent highway into the woods surrounding Darrell Ridge. The place barely qualified as a town, no open shops, no glowing signs, just houses drowned in silence, giving off the sense that outsiders didn't belong. My GPS guided me into a small gated cul-de-sac, maybe 20 houses total. Almost all sat dark. No street lamps, only the sweep of my headlights and the dull hum of my car. His address was number 14, a gray cottage with ivy climbing over its sides and a splintered wooden door. The driveway was empty. I grabbed my duffel and backpack, walked up to the keypad, punched in the code and heard the loudest click I'd ever heard. It echoed through the trees. I stepped inside and instantly felt out of place. The air wasn't filthy, but it carried the stillness of somewhere long sealed. And the plants, he hadn't exaggerated. The kitchen counters and walls overflowed with greenery, sprawling vines, palms, orchids, even a rubber fig. The smell was thick, damp soil mixed with stagnant water. "What the hell, a greenhouse?" I muttered. I tossed my bag onto a faded recliner in the small living room. The mismatched furniture looked sun-bleached and decades old. In the corner, a tiny square television sat on a stand. No remote, no wires, like a staged prop. I decided to check the bedrooms. The first held only a twin mattress on the floor with no frame or bedding, and on the windowsill 3 porcelain dolls from the 1950s stared out with cloudy glass eyes. I shut the door quickly. The second room was no comfort either. The walls were completely covered with wooden nutcracker figurines, many broken or crudely painted. A single sheet lay on the bed, no pillows, and the light switch controlled nothing. "Forget it," I whispered. I'd stay in the living room. I drove 10 minutes to a 24-hour store called Evergreen Market and grabbed frozen pizza rolls and iced tea. On the way out, I had the urge to check my GoPro footage. Ever since being robbed once in Virginia, I had the habit of setting it up whenever I stayed in rentals. I'd left it recording on the TV stand. Back inside, the house looked exactly the same, but I pulled the card and loaded it anyway. Nothing moved, yet something about the stillness unnerved me, as if the footage dared me to look harder. It was close to 1 a.m. when I stretched out on the couch. I kept the lights on, partly because the darkness in that place felt wrong and partly because I had no cell service since arriving. The isolation digging deeper as the night grew heavier. My phone charged in the kitchen, since the living room outlet didn't work. I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt watched from the hallway. Creaks echoed faintly, enough to keep me tense. Eventually, I went to the bathroom, its neon yellow light glaring against cracked tiles. No curtain, no clean surfaces, just a half-melted soap bar that looked untouched for months. While sitting there distracting myself by reading a shampoo bottle, I heard it, the shriek of wood scraping across the floor. A chair dragged across hardwood. It was unmistakably the chair I'd seen by the small kitchen table. Then another long screech, slower, like someone easing into it, followed by tapping, measured, deliberate finger drumming. Tap, tap, tap. My body nodded as the rhythm accelerated into frantic tapping before halting into absolute silence. The air was so still I could hear my pulse thundering. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. I pulled up my pants and convinced myself whoever was there already knew of me. So I ran. I darted from the bathroom, grabbed my backpack, and yanked out the Bowie knife I always traveled with. The kitchen was empty, the chair unmoved, tucked neatly beneath the table. The air pressed down on me like a weight. Trembling, I backed away, shoved my gear together, and bolted outside without turning off lights or checking the bedrooms. I drove an hour along deserted back roads before reaching Dunley, where I stumbled into a Holiday Inn Express at 3 a.m. The night clerk looked at me strangely. "You good?" he asked, noticing how pale I looked. "I just need a room," I answered weakly. He checked me in, gave me a king suite not even cleaned yet but with a made bed. I thanked him repeatedly and promised to leave early. Sleep never came. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the sounds. Who dragged that chair? Who tapped on that table? The GoPro footage remains with me, No movement, no audio, just silence. But I know what I heard. I know what followed me in that place. I never returned to Darrell Ridge, and I never again booked a guest house without a staffed front desk. I hadn't planned on stopping at a motel that night. If everything had gone the way it should have, I would have been home by 10:30, maybe 11 at the latest. But I ended up covering a last-minute shift at the shipping yard after one of the guys pulled a tendon in his leg. By the time I clocked out, I was already struggling to keep my eyes open behind the wheel. I knew better than to chance the long drive back to Fairmont in that condition. My vision blurred. My hands felt heavy and sore from gripping the steering wheel for too long. What I needed most was a bed. Any bed. It was late September 2022. I'd been working temporary contracts scattered across rural Northern California, moving between distribution jobs in small towns around Rensselaer County. That week I was lodging in Ridgevale with a stranger I'd found on Craigslist, who rented out half his camper for $60 a night. The place had unsettled me from the start, especially after spotting what I was pretty sure were rodent droppings inside the microwave. So that night, bone-tired and only wanting to rest somewhere without worrying about waking up to fleas or vermin bites, I pulled up Google Maps and searched for motels nearby. Only one appeared within 15 miles, Timberline Pines Motel. The name stuck out because it sounded oddly upscale for the area. I tapped the listing. No website, no reviews, just a phone number pinned to a stretch of Route 146 outside a town called Graydon. I called, and a man answered. He sounded older, maybe mid-60s. His tone wasn't exactly unfriendly, but there was no warmth in it either. He said they had a vacancy, told me to come by. Room 7 was available, and they didn't fuss much about check-in paperwork. That should have been a warning sign, but exhaustion had dulled my judgment. I told him I'd be there in about 25 minutes. It was 12:40 a.m. when I pulled off the highway and followed a gravel drive winding into a cluster of tall pines. The air shifted as I drove deeper in, cooler, heavier somehow. I shut off the radio and rolled the window down slightly. The only sounds were gravel crunching under the tires and the distant cry of some animal I couldn't identify. The Timberline Pines Motel appeared like a leftover relic from another era. A single L-shaped row of maybe 8 rooms. The siding was sun-faded beige. Some numbers above the doors were cracked or missing. A tiny wooden office cabin stood out front with a flickering yellow porch bulb. There were no other cars, no window lights. The whole place looked deserted. Still, I parked. Before I stepped out, the office door creaked open and a man walked out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", rail-thin, with long gray hair tied back loosely. He wore a heavy flannel shirt, though the night was still warm. His face was angular, weathered, carved with lines that suggested years in the sun but without joy. "You the caller?" he asked as he approached. "Yeah," I said. "Just need a room for the night. Quick stay." He didn't reply right away, only studied me for a moment before gesturing toward the office. "Room 7's yours," he said. "Cash or card?" "Card." He slid out an old reader, the type that's still plugged into a phone line. I handed him my card and ID, though he hardly glanced at them before swiping and giving me a brass key attached to a worn leather fob. "Extra towels in the closet. No room service. Try not to wander the grounds too much. Woods get thick out here." His words felt less like advice and more like a rule. Room 7 sat at the far end of the row. The exterior bulb was burned out, so I used my phone flashlight to guide the key into the knob. The interior wasn't filthy, but it wasn't clean either. The walls were painted a sickly green. The bed carried a stiff floral quilt that felt decades old. A box TV sat on the dresser but didn't work. Neither did the wall heater, though I didn't care. I tossed my bag on a chair, set my alarm for 6, and collapsed fully dressed on top of the covers. I didn't even bother pulling them back. Maybe an hour passed before something woke me. A knock. Not loud, just 2 soft taps, deliberate, at the door. I sat up, listening. Another knock followed, faint but sharper, impatient. I checked my phone. 2:07 a.m. I didn't move. I waited for a voice, for footsteps, for anything. Instead came a third knock, then silence. Slowly, I crept to the window and pulled the curtain just enough to peek. No one stood outside. The lot remained empty. The forest loomed behind it like a solid black wall. Then I caught it. Movement, low to the ground, just at the edge of the porch light's glow near the office. Something crawling. I blinked, and it was gone. Sleep never came back. I sat on the bed's edge, gripping my keys in one hand and a rusted nightstand lamp in the other. staring at the door until the sky began to pale. Just before dawn, another sound reached me, a door creaking open. I froze. Footsteps followed. Bare, unhurried. I cracked my door open just enough to see. A woman emerged from room 3. She looked mid-40s, barefoot, draped in a long nightgown. She moved slowly across the lot, eyes fixed straight ahead, unblinking, her gait heavy like she was wading through water. "Ma'am," I whispered. She gave no sign she'd heard me. Without pause, she drifted past and disappeared into the trees. I stood frozen before rushing to the office. The door was locked. I pounded on it, no response. I pulled my phone to dial 911. No signal, not a single bar. When I turned back, the old man stood at the tree line, barefoot as well, staring at me. I shouted, "The woman from room 3. She went into the woods. She looked out of it. Do you know her?" He didn't answer. He only curled his lips in the faintest smile before heading back to the office. That was it for me. I bolted, drove nonstop until I reached a gas station in Yarrow and finally had service. I searched Timberline Pines Motel. It took digging, but I uncovered an old article from 2006. The place had been shut down years earlier, after several strange incidents. Guests disappearing, locals reporting eerie sounds from the forest. One body had even been uncovered, shallowly buried behind room 3. It reopened in 2020, supposedly under different ownership. No record of who actually runs it now. None of it added up. The woman, the man, that place. Why would anyone bring it back? Unless keeping it alive was the whole purpose. I worked the overnight shift at a motel just outside Ashford. What unfolded one November night still lingers with me. By the time dawn arrived, I was no longer the same person who clocked in at dusk. I hadn't expected to find myself working graveyard hours at a roadside inn in a nearly forgotten town near Ashford. Yet life often veers where you least plan. After leaving university midway through my second year, something I still can't discuss without that constriction in my throat, I drifted aimlessly. I tried everything from stacking boxes in a warehouse to walking dogs. For a brief stretch, I even peddled used books out of the trunk of my car. None of it lasted. By 2022, I wound up in Milford, a small settlement 30 minutes west of Ashford. I rented a cheap room above a bakery and accepted a job I didn't think much of, night clerk at the Hollow Pines Inn. 2 stories high with a faded blue sign. It had 6 rooms upstairs and 4 tucked around back. No amenities, no charm, just bare functionality. The pay was £11.50 an hour and came with quiet, which I thought I wanted. Most nights dragged on without incident. I sat behind the battered oak desk, paperback in hand, with only the dim desk lamp casting light. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and disinfectant. The vending machine by the stairs gave out groans every few minutes, like sighs of exhaustion. Guests came and went, weary salesmen, couples avoiding questions, long-haul drivers looking for a few hours' rest. I stayed out of the way, letting time crawl. But that November night, cold, wet, and unnervingly quiet, stripped something from me I never regained. It began unremarkably. Rain had poured since late afternoon, turning the parking lot into a reflective pool of orange lamps and jagged shadows. I made a weak instant coffee and was halfway through a frayed mystery novel when the bell above the entrance rattled. I glanced up. The man who stepped inside wasn't wet, which unsettled me. The downpour was relentless outside, yet his long gray coat was bone dry. His boots, though, carried thick clumps of mud, leaving brown stains across the tile. "Evening," I said, nodding. He didn't respond, only fixed his eyes on me. His hair clung in matted strands, and a twitch worked beneath his left eye, unbidden. The hollows under his eyes looked carved from years. Not a single restless night. "Need a room?" I asked, glancing at the register. After a pause, he nodded once. "Cash," he muttered, producing a folded wad of notes. Only room 7 was free. I slid him the key. He scrawled the name Martin Hale on the form, his hand shaking. His signature was a jagged blur. I watched him shuffle down the hall, moving like someone unused to shelter. Homeless maybe, or drifting. Not my business. People had stories and I'd long stopped asking. The next hour crawled by. I washed glasses left by the day staff, refilled soap in the lobby washroom, then settled back in. Around midnight, drowsiness overtook me. The static of the old radio hummed me toward sleep until a noise cut through. A heavy thud, then what sounded like a drawer being yanked open and slammed shut. My head snapped up. Another thud, then dragging, as if something heavy scraped across a floor. Room 7. I rose and crept down the hallway, the old carpet swallowing my steps. I paused outside, listening. Silence. I knocked lightly. "Sir? Everything all right?" Nothing. After a wait, I turned back, dismissing it as someone shifting furniture. Guests did odd things in motels. I'd barely sat again when a violent crash shook the corridor. I bolted up just as Room 7's door flung open. Martin stood there, eyes wide, mouth twisted into something not a snarl, not a scream, but caught between. He stared at me like I wasn't real, like I was some figure from a fever. Then, without a word, he sprinted past me into Room 9. That room hadn't been occupied in days. I followed cautiously. "Sir, you can't be in there." Inside, he ripped the bedding apart like a man possessed, tearing sheets, flinging pillows, muttering words that made no sense. "Whatever you're looking for, it isn't here," I said carefully. He didn't hear or didn't care. I reached for my phone, only to remember I'd left it at the desk. I turned to fetch it, but froze when I saw Daniel at the doorway. Daniel wasn't official motel staff, but he worked private security at a property nearby and often dropped in late at night for tea or talk. Broad-shouldered, calm, the kind of presence you couldn't ignore. He took in the scene. "You all right?" he asked low. I nodded uncertainly. "I think he's on something, or just not well." Daniel stepped forward, palms visible. "Hey friend, let's settle down. Nobody's here to hurt you." Martin spun and lunged. The crash of their struggle filled the room, fists against drywall, glass shattering, the groan of a collapsing bed frame. "Call the police," Daniel shouted, straining to hold him down. I dashed for the desk, grabbed the phone and dialed 999 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's steady voice cut through my panic as I spilled out the address in fragments of description while the chaos echoed down the hall. By the time blue lights filled the rain-slicked lot, Daniel had Martin pinned. One arm twisted behind him, blood on his lip, but eyes steady. The officers swarmed in, quick and precise. Martin thrashed, screamed, bit, but they managed the cuffs and dragged him out. Through the cruiser's rain-streaked window, his face turned toward me. The fury was gone, only pleading remained. The rest blurred. Statements, questions. 2 guests came down worried, asking if the motel was safe. I assured them, though even I didn't believe my words. A young officer, nervous yet kind, told me Martin had priors, unstable, erratic, once briefly institutionalized, no family. They suspected meth, maybe schizophrenia, maybe both. I stayed until Ruth, the morning clerk, arrived past 6. She took one look at me, said nothing, just placed a mug of hot tea in front of me and assumed the desk. I walked home under the dim gray morning, the rain thinning to mist that clung like sweat. I didn't sleep. My mind replayed his urgency, his breaking into Room 9, the one he wasn't assigned. Why that one? I worked at Hollow Pines for another 5 months before leaving for a delivery job, vowing never to work another night shift. Yet even now, when I pass decaying buildings or empty inns, I think of him, what he was so desperately searching for, and whether he ever found it, at least in his own fractured way. It isn't the screams or the fight that stays with me. It's that last look through the window, his eyes reflecting something achingly familiar, exhaustion, loss, and the desperate hope that the world still held meaning no one else could see. I was 25 when I landed a job at a roadside motel off Highway 41, about half an hour outside a town called Hollow Creek. The year before had been brutal. Losing my job, ending a long relationship that had stretched 4 years, and barely surviving off small editing projects that no longer covered my bills. With my city lease running out and savings non-existent, I packed what little I had and moved into the cheapest option I could find, a shabby studio in a town most drivers sped past without noticing. Rent was low, the area was quiet, and I told myself I just needed breathing room. My parents weren't thrilled, especially my mother. She pleaded with me to stay with them, but I needed independence. I needed to prove to myself that I could rebuild on my own. That's when I stumbled across a posting for a night clerk at the Ashwood Inn. It popped up on a forgotten classifieds page I didn't even recall saving. No prior experience required, just reliability, comfort with night hours, and the ability to handle being alone most of the time. I had no other options. I dialed the number expecting voicemail, but a man picked up. He introduced himself as Victor. He sounded almost unnervingly eager to fill the position, and asked me to stop by later that same day. The Ashwood Inn sat behind a line of pines along a bend in the highway. Its single-story structure stretched into a row of 10 rooms, paint flaking off and a battered neon sign flickering faintly even under the sun. Instead of a lobby, there was just one cramped office built into the wall beside Room 1. Victor met me at the door. He looked late 50s, heavy-shouldered, hair thinning in uneven gray tufts. His button-down streaked permanently with sweat. His handshake was coarse, his smile lingering a moment longer than it should have. "You're Sam, right?" he asked. "Samantha," I corrected softly. "But Sam is fine." His grin deepened. "Sam, you're exactly what I needed." He said it with conviction, though the way his eyes lingered made my gut knot. I swallowed the feeling because I needed work. The tour was brief, 5 minutes at most. He showed me the tiny office, the battered desk with its old-fashioned guest ledger, the wall of keys locked behind glass, the stained coffee machine, and the storage closet packed with towels and cleaning supplies. Above the desk sat a small TV playing grainy security feeds. "You won't have to worry much. Hardly any guests here," Victor said. Shifts were from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week, $16 an hour cash, free coffee and microwave meals. My duties: check in anyone who arrived, answer calls and keep things quiet. There was even a cot in the office for naps during slow hours. But when he added, "Most of the time you'll be completely alone," a chill slid through me. Still, I nodded. I reminded myself that after the year I'd had, it was normal to feel uneasy. I convinced myself this was temporary. I started 2 nights later. My first shift felt uneventful, silent, dragging on. Only 2 rooms were occupied. I kept the office light burning, brewed coffee I didn't touch, and watched the black and white security monitors. The feeds showed the front lot, the hall outside rooms 1 to 5, and a blurry view of the back fence. No coverage for rooms 6 through 10. I didn't question it at the time. To kill time, I read an old paperback tucked in the desk drawer and flipped through the guest ledger. Most names were one-night stays, cash only, scrawled in mismatched handwriting. None listed phone numbers or IDs, which I thought odd. Every motel I'd ever stayed at asked for ID. I brushed it off as small-town casualness. Around 2:30 a.m. something happened. I was flipping pages when I heard the sharp sound of the front door clicking open. I looked up. No one was there. The door hadn't blown wide as if caught by wind. Instead, it had shifted slightly as though someone had tested it. I stepped outside, scanning the lot. Nothing. The air was thick, damp, the only sound the buzzing of crickets and cicadas in the trees. I shut the door and locked it this time. A few minutes later, static rolled across the hallway feed. When the image cleared, room 3's door was ajar. I checked the log. Room 3 hadn't been rented for over a week. I stared at the screen as the door creaked further open, a fraction more, exposing a sliver of black inside. I froze. The phone shrilled, making me jump. I snatched it up. "Ashwood Inn, Sam speaking." The line carried only heavy breathing at first, then a rasping male voice whispered, "You don't belong here." The call cut. I stood stiff, receiver still in hand. On the monitor, room 3's door was shut again. I don't know why I didn't call the cops. I kept insisting it was some prank, maybe local kids trying to scare the newcomer. The following night, Victor stopped by before my shift. "Any issues?" he asked, his grin fixed the same way as before. I hesitated. "Not really. Just room 3's door swinging open. Might want to check the lock." His smile didn't falter. "That room's sealed. Hasn't been touched in years." I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. "Don't concern yourself with room 3. Just stay in the office. You'll be fine." At around 3 a.m. that shift, I heard footsteps crunching on gravel outside the office. I peered through the glass. Nothing. But on the monitor I saw movement in the back lot, a tall, thin figure dragging something heavy across the ground. The image glitched, scrambled, then went black. When it flicked back, the lot was empty. I hurried to grab the keys from the closet, wanting to check the back door. But the keys for room 3 were missing. I hadn't seen anyone enter. Someone had been inside. I pushed through the rest of the shift without sleeping. When Victor returned, I unloaded everything. The strange call, the door, the footsteps, the figure. I even asked if the motel had a history of crimes or accidents. He stared, lips bent into the same immovable grin. "I had a feeling you'd scare easy," he said. I straightened. "I'm not." "Then prove it. Make it through the week." The 4th night was my breaking point. At 1 a.m., someone knocked on the office door. Slow, steady. 5 times. Not the bell, a knock. I peeked through the glass. A man stood there. His face pale, eyes hollow, collar stained red. I stumbled back, grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The line wouldn't connect. I looked again, the man had vanished. But on the hallway feed he appeared outside room 3. Stepping through its door now swung wide. I bolted. I didn't even take my belongings. I jumped in my car and didn't stop until I reached my parents' house. The police checked the motel the following day. They found my wallet and backpack stuffed in the dumpster out back. Victor told them I'd quit without warning, that I wasn't built for night shifts. Room 3 was found locked from the inside. No trace of the man. Stranger still, all the security tapes after midnight were erased. I never collected pay, but I didn't care. 3 months later, I heard the Ashwood Inn shut down. Rumors spread, squatters, a missing traveler, a smell coming from room 3. I never returned. I never worked nights again. I was 13 the summer. Everything shifted. Not in some dramatic, catastrophic way. There were no deaths, no disasters, but in that subtle, suffocating sense where something inside you tilts forever, leaving things just slightly off balance. My name's Colin. I grew up in a small town in southern Wisconsin. Endless flat farmland, quiet evenings, and the kind of community where neighbors still left their doors unlocked. We didn't have much, but we had what we needed. My mom worked at the town's drugstore and kept books for a few businesses on the side. My dad wasn't around. He'd left when I was 6. So it was me, my mom, and my little brother Lucas, who was 6 that summer. We went to visit my mom's cousin in St. Louis. Though instead of staying at her house, we checked into a roadside motel. Mom said she didn't want to intrude. Honestly, I think she just liked having her own space, a room where she could lock the door. The motel was nothing special. 2 floors, a vending machine that rarely worked, and a pool that reeked more of chemicals than chlorine. But it was cheap, clean enough, and not far from my mom's cousin. We were given room 109, tucked around the back on the ground floor, a short walk from the pool. The day we arrived, the sky hung heavy with that gray tone that hints at rain but never follows through. While Mom went to the desk for our keys, I was stuck watching Lucas. We sat on one of those splintered benches outside the office. Lucas poked ants with a straw, while I scrolled on my cracked phone, sweating through my shirt. That's when he appeared. The man. Ordinary. That's the only word I can use. Average height, average build, short brown hair, tan slacks, gray polo. He could have been 40, maybe 50. He looked like the sort of person you'd forget instantly. Only I didn't forget him, because he didn't approach the counter. Instead, he came in, sat directly across from us, and stared. He didn't speak, didn't move much, just sat. But it felt wrong. When Mom came back waving the key cards, she called us over. I grabbed Lucas's hand and followed quickly without saying a word about the man. Later that evening, after a long visit with relatives, we returned around 7. Lucas had been pestering Mom all day about swimming, so she finally relented. We changed into our suits, grabbed towels and headed to the pool. For a while it felt normal. Empty water, echoing splashes, the warm smell of bleach. Then he came back. Same man. This time he stood outside the gate, leaning on the fence, arms crossed, still in the same clothes. No swimsuit, no towel, just watching. I froze halfway through a lap. Mom noticed too. Her eyes narrowed, and she gave me a tiny nod like, I see him as well. After a few minutes, she leaned close and whispered, if he's not gone in 5 minutes, we're leaving. 5 minutes passed. He stayed. We gathered our things and left without looking back. The air felt heavy, almost pressing against us. Back in the room, Lucas curled up with his tablet while Mom put on some cartoon to distract him. I pretended to watch but kept flicking glances at the door, the window, the strip of darkness beneath the curtains. Mom got up after a while, saying she needed a shower. She looked uneasy but didn't comment. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. 2 short taps. Then a voice. Housekeeping. I frowned. It was after 9. Why would staff come so late? Lucas didn't look up. I hesitated, then slowly cracked the door. I wish I hadn't. It was him, the man. Up close, I noticed a scar beneath his left eye. He smiled. A slow, unsettling smile. His hands were behind his back. Then he lifted one in a small wave. How was your swim? My body locked. My throat felt like it was packed with gravel. I couldn't move. At that moment, the bathroom door creaked open. Steam rolled out and Mom stepped into the room in a towel, drying her hair. Her eyes darted to the doorway, to him, and without flinching, she dropped the towel, grabbed me by the arm and slammed the door shut in one swift motion. The deadbolt clicked, the chain slid into place. She didn't ask questions. She went straight to the phone and dialed the front desk. Her voice was steady but tight, like a wire pulled too hard. "Room 109. There's a man pretending to be staff. He followed us earlier, and now he's outside our door. Not a guest, not in uniform. He knows my kids were at the pool. We need another room." "No police," I begged her, but she said, "We'll move first." We were relocated upstairs, room 209, overlooking the parking lot. New locks, new angle. We never saw him again that night or the next. Still, I didn't sleep. 2 days later, the desk clerk told Mom they reviewed footage but couldn't confirm if the man was staying there. They said they'd keep staff watching the lot at night. That didn't reassure us. We cut the trip short and left early. Mom stayed quiet on the drive home. Lucas was too young to grasp why the vacation ended. But I knew. I still see that man sometimes. Not in dreams, but in crowds. On buses and gas stations. For a moment I'll think it's him. Then I blink and it's gone. What haunted me wasn't only that he watched us. It was that he had a plan. He tracked us from the lobby, to the pool, to our room. He timed his knock for when Mom was in the shower. People don't like stories like this. There's no neat ending. No arrest, no headline. Just fear lodged deep, clinging like a burr to your spine. I'll never know what would have happened if I hadn't opened the door. But I think about it often. I think about room 109. About how evil doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it simply knocks, smiles, and asks, "How was your swim?" We never went back to St. Louis. The years rolled on. School, sports, awkward teenage phases, first jobs. Lucas barely remembers it. He believes we left early because Mom was sick. I never corrected him. Some truths feel safer buried. Once, years later, I asked Mom if she remembered that man. We were sitting on the porch after dinner. She lit a cigarette, stared into the night, and finally said, "You never open a door unless you know who's there." That was it. I didn't press. She died 3 years ago. Quick, sudden heart attack. At the funeral, everyone said how strong she was, how lucky we were. I nodded, but the memory I held was that night. Her speed, her decisiveness. No hesitation, no panic. I don't know what she saw in him. Something I hadn't. Or maybe she had seen it years before in someone else. Now I'm older than she was back then. I have a son of my own, about the same age Lucas was, and sometimes late at night, when there's an unexpected knock, my heart falters for a moment, long enough for that old fear to return. I always check the peephole, always. Most times it's nothing. Delivery, wrong address, a kid selling candy. But sometimes there's no one at all, just 2 quick knocks. Silence. I double lock the door and think about room 109, because the most unsettling stories don't always end. Some linger, waiting just outside.